We would like to acknowledge that the episodes in this series are produced on the traditional unceded lands of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for allowing us to be their guests.
It's an emotional experience coming back here anyway, at any time, especially now because COVID is, let's hope, winding down. And so this is the longest I've been away from Vancouver.
How long now have you been away? Just because of the COVID?
I've lived away, about 2 years.
2 years,
I moved away in 2000 to Kingston.
Right.
And I feel like, Kingston has its charms, but I feel like I live in exile.
Yeah.
I feel I really identify with this city, I always have. Yeah. So it's strange being back, and it's really weird being back in front of the Cultch where
well, the thing is, I'm glad we could do that.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that we could do it because we've got so much history here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean...
a couple of major turning points in my life took place in this building.
Well, I guess that's good. Turning points, you know, they could be good. They could be... Yeah. Major turning points in my life happened in this building too, and in this city. I mean, I came here never expecting to stay here, right? I mean, I was just going to come for 2 years, you know, and then go back to North Carolina or somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I guess I got addicted pretty quickly to this place. So yeah.
Well, I'll get around to this, but I decided to live here before the plane landed.
I guess we should also. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're here at the Vancouver East Cultural Center at
home of our youths.
Home of our youths
at
1895 patio, which is a new thing that they did, I think, in response to COVID because they had to shut down the theater and couldn't do any performances much. They began to do streaming performances and record things.
Yeah,
but this has become quite, I don't know how many people are going to be here today, but I've been told it's great. So here we are.
Cool.
And they just brought us the cheese plate,
which
looks pretty, well, I'll get into that.
So I'm going to do this whole thing with my mouth full. Born Christmas Eve, 1947.
Get out of
here. Middle class, nice Jewish family, Montreal. Father, life insurance salesman and estate planner. Mother, an artist, a painter and printmaker, who studied with the great Arthur Lismer of the Group of Seven, which is a feather in the family's cap.
That's a good pedigree.
Older brother who's still with us, who is kind of a brilliant scientist, engineer, mathematician, psychologist, then became a lawyer. Recently retired as a lawyer and wrote his first novel. Interesting guy. So I grew up in this extended family of cousins and uncles and aunts, and just kind of a secure life. Very little theater in Montreal when I was growing up. No movies because there was a tragedy. There was a fire in a theater and some children got killed. It was during a children's matinee. And the government overreacted and said no children in theaters ever again.
Really?
For some years, yeah.
I didn't know that.
And no television in our house until I got one for my bar mitzvah.
That's amazing because you seem to me to be one of the more literate people about all that I've ever encountered. I mean,
well, that's probably because there was no television in the house. I just saw Peter Dinklage being interviewed on Stephen Colbert. And he too grew up without a TV set in the house. He said, my parents were smart.
Wow.
And my dad, although he never made money as a writer, he was a very good writer, and he was proud of being a good writer. And the house was full of books. And my mother was kind of a cultured person too. This is going to sound odd, but there was an American cartoonist named Walt Kelly who had a comic strip called Pogo, which I've been learning lately is more famous than I thought it was, and I grew up on him. Brilliant dialogue, and I was a Danny Kaye fan. I did somehow. We managed to see some movies. I'm
sure that the movie lobby finally got the government.
I remember just hearing this story as a child, and I don't know how accurate it was or what the truth was, but I know that movies were few and far between. But I do remember The Court Jester with Danny Kaye. In high school, everybody was telling me I was going to be a writer because I was a good writer. And I had a wonderful teacher in grade 5, and then I was lucky enough to get her again in grade 7, Mrs. Levitsky, who was young and beautiful, and I had a bit of a crush on. And she greatly encouraged me in my writing. And the fun about this, and the punchline of the story is we're still friends.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, she lives in Montreal with her husband, and we phone each other on occasion. And she became friends with my parents, and so the relationship continued. Anyway, so she was encouraging. I remember one day before class, a girl had didn't have a pen, and there was an exam coming up or something, and she was panicking. And one of the guys said, "Well, ask Lazarus. Lazarus always has 2 or 3 pens."
Yeah, lots of pens.
Yeah, and he met it nicely, but it was like, okay, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy with 2 or 3 girlfriends. I don't want to be the guy with 2 or 3 pens. So acting looked interesting. When I was in my teens, I attended a summer camp for teenagers, an artsy summer camp called Manitowoc Camp of Fine Arts in Parry Sound, Ontario. And I did theater there. Right. And they brought up some really good people. They brought up some very cool directors and people from New York, some names or semi-names. You know, I didn't think about making a living doing it, you know, surviving doing it. But and then went to McGill for a year, McGill University in Montreal. And now there's a story here. My father grew up, I'm like 3rd generation Canadian.
Yeah.
So my grandparents came from Eastern Europe around 1910. My father's father was a tailor of some note and had a tailor shop on University Avenue just down the street from McGill campus. My father grew up 2 blocks from McGill. Should have gone to McGill by rights, I think. But until the end of the Second World War, McGill had a policy of setting higher standards for Jewish applicants than non-Jewish applicants. This was public. This was absolutely unashamed and public. I have a cousin who said, why did nobody ever object? Why didn't we protest? You know? So the end of the first year at McGill, I was bored and I auditioned for the National Theatre School.
So what were you taking at McGill? It was so boring. I mean, did they have a program, a stream that would take you into theater and arts? Or
no, no. I was doing theater kind of extracurricularly with the McGill Players Club. Right. We did Andorra and The Lark by Jean Anouilh and various other sort of modern European classics, you know, Samuel Beckett and stuff, but it was all extracurricular. The courses weren't bad. I hated my math teacher, but I took Latin and ancient Greek. I'd taken Latin in high school, and math, and I forget what else. But it was me. I was just didn't care. Yeah. So I auditioned, and then that summer I got a phone call from National Theatre School, which was and still is in Montreal, so that was cool. You know. But anyway, this woman phoned and said, "Sorry, you did not get in." And she said, "I don't know if this is going to make you feel better or worse, but you were at the top of the list of people who didn't get in this year. You're the best person we rejected this year, so you might want to try again next year." So that made me feel a little better. You know, I thought, well, they took me seriously. I didn't make a complete ass of myself. Okay, fine. And I started preparing to go back to McGill. And then, in fact, I had actually started at McGill in second year when I got the next phone call from the National Theatre School, which began their year some weeks later than McGill did. 1960. Got a phone call from the same woman. Yeah. And she said, one of our students who got in can't make it, so you're in. So I went in through those sacred portals, convinced that I was the least talented person in my class. I had proof. Good. They had taken everybody else, and then I snuck in under the wire because some poor kid couldn't make it. And I played that part for 3 years. Yes. I was the loser student. I was the guy who couldn't do it. I was the last person to get up and do an improv, or the last person to make a suggestion.
You internalized that.
Yeah. And I, as a prof, as a teacher, I would sometimes, if it came up, I would tell the students that story. And then I would say, each of you is the most talented, intelligent person in this class. Don't tell the others I told you that, it's our little secret, but you're the best person in this class. And you're the best person in this class. And take a leadership role, you know, and help the others along. They'll never surpass you because you're the most talented person, but, you know, and so the students, of course, like that. Yeah. And the year or two after I graduated, which I'll get to in detail in a minute, I kept having the experience. I was doing acting work, and I kept having the experience of going, oh, that's how that works. Why didn't they teach me that? Oh, right, they did. But I wasn't hearing it. And I had to be out on stage doing it before I kind of went, oh, they did teach me this stuff, and start to absorb it and use it. Right. There was no professional English language theater in Montreal at that time. There's now the Centaur and I forget the current name for the Sadie Bronfman Theater. There's a couple of theaters and more than those. But at the time there wasn't anything. Maurice Podbury started the Centaur Theater the year after my group graduated. And so I don't know if they still do this, but at the end of the school year, they would put us on a train and send us to Stratford to watch performances and rehearsals, which was really fascinating, and to meet the actors and other, backstage folk and talk with them. And the week that we were there, one of the spear carriers quit. Now, spear carriers are people fresh out of theater school who are standing there with a spear in their hand decorating the stage, because Stratford has a style where they don't bring on walls. Yeah. They use young actors to do that. Yeah. And you're not speaking any lines. You come on your, I played 10th soldier in Hamlet when I got in there, and stuff like that. So one of these guys was 33 years old, and he was still being a spear carrier, and he was fed up, and he quit. And the two more talented guys in our class weren't available. Right. So they threw me into the middle of the season. They auditioned all of us and videotaped our auditions. Uh-huh. And I'm sure mine wasn't very good, but I was available.
You go down there, you get a look around, and they also audition.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And in this case, just through sheer fluke, I'm suddenly in the company. And I was terrified. I was scared shitless. Sure. And the first rehearsal I had was Tartuffe, starring Bill Hutt, the famous William Hutt. The first thing I had to do in rehearsal was throw him on the floor and put chains on him, because we were arresting him at the end of the play. Sorry, I've ruined Tartuffe. He gets arrested at the end of the play. And I couldn't fucking move. I went on in Hamlet one night, oh my God, with my helmet on backwards. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking. I was just going, we were doing Hamlet, starring Ken Welsh as Hamlet, and the great Powys Thomas as Polonius, who became a good friend. There was a wonderful actor who died the following year in a car crash, and his name was Leo Chichery, and he was extraordinary. Neil Daynard. Right. We later became friends. He was playing he was playing Laertes in Hamlet and Lucio in Measure for Measure. Bill Hutt, of course, was the big cheese. Anne Anglin was playing Ophelia. And that was the time I jammed my spear into the wall by mistake. I was, you march on through these narrow doors, so the spear has to be horizontal, right? And you got to come through and go ka-chunk, right? That's how you enter when you're a spear carrier. And I came in and she was doing her mad scene, and I didn't come in far enough, and instead of going ka-chunk, it's like the tip of the spear hit the door jamb. So I kind of played that I was so shocked by Ophelia going mad that I'd made a mistake, right? And, from a little section. Got a laugh from a couple of people sitting near me. Anyway, so they didn't invite me back. Okay. And I talked to somebody at Manitoba Theatre Centre in Winnipeg, and by now it was November, and I didn't know where to go next. Right. And I had a phone number for some children's theatre company. We now call it TYA, Theatre for Young Audiences. Yes, right. Is the correct term, but in those days it was like kiddie theater, children's theater, in Vancouver. So I phoned the number, and it was a friend of mine from theater school, Norma Hebert, who said, hey, John, come on out, we're auditioning. And it was like, oh my God, a friend, somebody I know, okay, fine. And I got on the plane in the middle of winter, November in Winnipeg, and I remember looking out the window as we were approaching Vancouver, and it was clouds, 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 and then the clouds parted. Oh my God. It looked like this Japanese garden with a little footbridge. It was Stanley Park and the Lionsgate Bridge, but it was just exquisite, I fell in love with the place immediately. I thought, I'm going to live here. Yeah. And I remember coming out of the airport and peeling the winter clothing off of me because it was like November in Vancouver. Yeah. And I grabbed a cabinet. Coming from Winnipeg. I grabbed a cabinet. It was a woman taxi driver I don't think in 30 years living in Vancouver I've ever had a female taxi driver since then, but I went, okay, Vancouver's full of female taxi drivers. This is really cool.
It's a great city.
Yeah. And went to the office of Playhouse Holiday, which was the company that Norma had told me to come and audition for.
That was sort of the touring company.
It was the green thumb of its day,
Yeah.
as it were. It had started as Holiday Theatre. I think it had been started by Joy Coghill.
Yeah.
And then it got taken over by the Vancouver Playhouse and run as their sort of TYA arm.
Yeah.
And I went in. The first person I met was Pamela Hawthorne. And the great late Ray Michael, who was this very imposing but very kindly fellow, a wonderful man who ran the company, and Bill Millard, whom I knew slightly from theater school.
Long time guy who ran the Arts Club Theater.
Yes, a legend now. He's recently retired from running the Arts Club. And I was in a great mood. I was just really happy to be here, and did a very relaxed and cheerful and energetic audition and got the tour. And spent 1970 on 2 tours of British Columbia. I got to see all of British Columbia, which was spectacular. Early 70s, Justin Trudeau's daddy had a minority government, wanted to curry favor with people, so he found a bunch of change in the sofa cushions, and he instituted some grant programs, OFY grants, Opportunities for Youth, LIP grants, Local Initiative Projects, fantastic programs that seeded an awful lot of different kinds of organizations, many of which were arts organizations, and many of those were theater companies. And our dear, late, lamented friend David Peterson phoned me up and said, there's this company starting called Troop. Do you want to join? And it was, I said, do I audition? He said, no, just come on in. Which I did. And I remember the first meeting, and the guy who put it together was this guy named Jonathan Bankson.
John Bankson.
Yeah.
Doug Bankson's son.
Doug Bankson's son. And when I am telling this story to my students, I mention you.
Oh.
And the reason for that is that you'll remember this. A couple of years ago, I put out a thing on Facebook, and I said, Facebook friends who are about my age, theater people in Canada, does anybody remember taking a playwriting course, post-secondary playwriting course, when you were students? You were the only person who responded.
Really?
You said you took a playwriting course at UBC from Doug Bankson, and it included a playwriting component.
Yeah.
And I tell my students that to make the point that nobody was teaching playwriting. When I went to the National Theatre School, sometimes kids say to me, oh, you took the playwriting program. And I say, no, there wasn't one. And not to knock the National Theatre School, nobody else was teaching playwriting, except this one American professor.
And George Riga.
And was he teaching?
George
No
Riga.
shit.
Yeah.
George Riga was the first playwright I ever met.
Oh, wow.
Because Ray Michael had decided to commission him to write a play for the high schools for our first tour.
Right.
The second tour we did this Jean Anouilh thing for high schools. The first tour, the high school show, was a play that he wrote for us called Compressions.
Okay.
And unfortunately, his wife was having medical issues, and he kept having to take her to California for treatments, and he wasn't in rehearsal. And I think the play suffered from that.
Sure.
But anyway, that was like the first Canadian playwright I ever knew of. So George Riga.
Cheers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But at one point on the second tour, tell you honestly, I dropped some acid and went for a walk in Prince George and decided to be a playwright.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Because one of the plays I was in was so bad that I pictured the playwright sitting at home collecting royalties while we're busting our butts, trying to sell this crap to children. And my issue with writing not being sexy and me wanting to be sexy, it's sort of been resolved. I'd had a few girlfriends, and I thought, I've proven I can be an attractive person. So I can write now. I can go back to writing now. It's safe. It's all right. And I wrote 2 plays that I still have that are very, very derivative of the stuff we were doing, plays for children. They're not very good. And then back in Vancouver, I wrote one for the West Vancouver Little Theatre Guild, which I directed the play. Jo was in it. She played a bird. It was called Chester, You Owe My Bird an Apology. And the first sentence of the first review that I ever got as a playwright read, "More than the bird is owed an apology." But it was a start. It was a start. So back at Troop, this company that was founded on an LIP grant by John Bankson, Doug Bankson's son. I didn't know Doug Bankson. I didn't know who he was. We're sitting around at this first meeting. We're all hippies. It's where I met David Peterson. And, Jackie Crossland was there, Mariasha Kalensky, Tom Hoff, Barbara Gordon, Dyken, Richard Sutherland. And John Bankson said, well, my dad's written a play, and I laughed out loud. And I tell that story to students to illustrate how weird that was, not knowing that John Bankson's father was American, which is kind of part of the story, or that he was the wonderful Doug Bankson who was running this playwriting program at UBC. But the idea that somebody's middle-aged dad would be writing plays in Canada was just outlandish at the time. I'll do a little side trip here. Sure. Speaking of Riga, his play, The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, may have been the first Canadian play to be produced outside of Canada. Not sure about that. John Herbert wrote Fortune in Men's Eyes, which might have been done elsewhere. And there was Yellow Fever by Rick Shiomi. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was produced in 67, I think, 66, 67. Ecstasy of Rita Joe opened in Washington, D.C., and the New York Times sent a guy named Julius Novick to review it. And in his review, he wrote, "Canadian playwright. The words seem a little incongruous together, like Lebanese fur trapper almost, or Panamanian hockey player." And I cut that out of the review and taped it to my typewriter. And every morning I would come to the typewriter and look at that and go, "Fuck you, Julius Novick," and start to work. And I've always hoped to meet him so I can thank him for that, that bit of push that he gave me with that stupid comment. Yeah. But it was the same world in which I was laughing at the idea that John Bankson's father might have written a play. Yes. The play was Lenore Nevermore. It was about Edgar Allan Poe, and we did it, and it was fun. It was good. Anyway, so we started our season with Troop, and it was, by present-day standards, a little disorganized. We didn't have the whole season laid out when we began. We were just kind of, flying by ear a little bit. And for the second show, we had 2 one-act plays. We had a version of Beauty and the Beast by the late, great Jackie Crossland. And a little one-man show called The Fat Edge by the late, great David Peterson, with Richard Sutherland wearing a hat and a necktie and spats, and that's all he was wearing, sitting on a, those were the days, sitting on a wall, being Humpty Dumpty. That was the thing. Right. And we knew it was like, this evening was going to come up short. This was not a full evening of entertainment. I'm sitting there staring at the floor and thinking, if I'm really going to be a playwright, I should be able to write a play on the first thing I see. I should look up, like Titania, look up and fall in love with the first thing I see and write a play about it, which is stupid, but it led somewhere. And I look up, the first thing I see is the lighting man's stepladder, because we were in tech. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a play on a stepladder. I'm going to write a play on a stepladder. Alex Dyken and I will do the play on a stepladder, and that'll be the set. So if it's going to be a stepladder, it should represent something huge, the biggest thing ever built. It should represent like the Tower of Babel. So I go home that night and I write this little improvised dialogue, 20 minutes, between a guy who's hammering away at the tower, wanting to finish it and get to heaven, and a guy who's sitting back and smoking a joint and saying, "Why the fuck are we bothering? We're going to get to heaven when we die anyway, aren't we?" And I called it Babel Rap. Because in those days, a rap was a serious conversation among hippies, not like we have today. And I wrote it in one evening, and I brought it in the next day, and Dyken and I read it to the rest of the company, and everybody went, "Yep, okay, we're doing it." And I thought, this is great. This will be my career. I'll write one of these every evening. I could never do it again. Off to the races. Yeah. Off to the races. And we did it, and it was kind of a hit. And then that got, Ray Michael had gone on to run City Stage in downtown Vancouver, which was lunchtime theater, and he did the first, the second production, the remount of Babel Rap. Yeah, which would have been the perfect length for him down there. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
He was
And-
always looking for things that could fit into a short period for the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And I'd act in a couple of those shows down there. And so then I just continued writing one acts, but I didn't know how to do it. God, there's so many of the names I'm saying now are people who've gone. Janet Wright said to me, well, you know how Harold Pinter does it? He just improvises dialogue. He writes one line and then he writes an answer, and he writes an answer and that and keeps going until he's got an award-winning masterpiece. And I thought, oh, that's how it's done. Okay, I can do that. And I kept doing that for 7 years. And I kept writing these little one acts. And it was on-the-job training. And it was a period when Canadian playwriting was a real kind of motherhood issue. And people wanted to encourage Canadian playwrights.
Yes.
And so we got away with crap. What?
I remember that very much. That period of time, that thing where when we were doing Tamahnous right around the same time as Troupe, and we were looking for Canadian plays, and it was like, well, where are they? Where are these plays? And it was like, okay, we're going to make our own literature here. We have to do that.
Exactly.
That was a big part of the time.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot.
Now there's a lot. But that was the beginning of it all. And one of the many reasons that I started teaching was I wanted to be the guy I didn't have. Or, I needed somebody to sit me down and say, look, kid, here's a few shortcuts, or I thought about Riga, but with all due respect to Riga, his work has never been much to my taste, and I was afraid he might try to teach me to write like him, and I didn't want that. I wanted to... So, I kept churning out these improvised dialogues, and I kept wondering why a story was not generating itself for me, except on certain occasions when that would sort of happen. The story of the Tower of Babel was kind of built in, so that was fine. But that play sent me on the wrong track and poor Janet, sent me on the wrong track of let's just keep improvising dialogue. Now we come to MIDAS. Now, this talking to the camera, this is very interesting. I'm sitting in front of the Vancouver East Cultural Centre with Stevie Miller and Susie Payne, who were in the play that I'm about to describe. Yeah. Yay. 77?
Maybe, yeah. Something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, 77.
Fuck. Wow.
Yeah.
In this building over here.
Yeah.
And Larry Lillo, bless him.
Jackie.
And Jackie,
Jackie
directed it. Larry, I think, was instrumental in saying, yes, let's do this play before I had finished a coherent draft. And I was also, the other part of my life was Joa had got pregnant, and I had decided I'm going to man up, and we had got married, and I went out and got myself a job. I was sitting on the bus looking at the bus ads and thinking, there's all this writing, and people got paid to do all this writing.
Yeah.
I could get paid to do writing. This is slightly longish detour about the job I got. I went out with a bunch of copies of a resume looking for writing work, and I went into CHQM radio station. Easy listening and classical music, and I love classical music, so I thought that might be cool. And I was so out of touch with the workaday world that I didn't know that I was choosing to do my search for a job on a holiday. It was a Monday. It was in August. It was a holiday. I didn't know that.
In theater, we don't.
Yeah, so out of it. Yeah. So I walk in. There's nobody there except this one young guy with long hair. So that was a good sign.
Yeah.
And this was Jürgen Goff.
Oh my God.
Another one we've lost, who went on to great fame as a wonderful disc jockey of classical music on CBC radio and an expert on food and wine who published a number of beautiful cookbooks. Wonderful guy. And I said, and a fun guy. Very, very funny. Yeah. Anyway, I came in. I said, I'm looking for work as an advertising copywriter. He said, well, your timing is good. We're looking for an advertising copywriter. I said, great, here's my resume. I handed it to him. He read it. He said, great resume. Nothing in here about advertising copywriting. And I said, tell you what, give me an account. Give me a client and give me a half an hour and one of your typewriters and I'll write you some ads. And he laughed and, yeah, sure, what the fuck. And he found something for an interior decorator or some high-end restaurant or one of the kinds of clients that CHQM dealt in, and gave me their fact sheet and what they want to emphasize in their ad campaign and stuff. And I went back and I tapped out a bunch of ads. And I came back and he read them and he started to laugh. And he laughed so loud and long that I'm waiting for him to say, "Fuck you, get out of here." And he stopped laughing and said, "You're hired, you start Monday." And I had a job. I had that job, I believe, while we were doing MIDAS. And I was never there. And I think it was you guys, actually, the last time we talked, who told me that you think of that show as the play where the playwright was never there and you had to figure it out on your own. That's not how I saw it at all.
No,
but
I don't think of it as that. This is maybe not the, we can get into that later.
What went wrong with MIDAS?
That as a structurally, not the play, but the way the play was put up is sort of a complicated structural
mess.
You know,
it was a mess.
And I actually put some of the blame on Jackie for that.
I know you've said that to me before.
I think Jackie was
okay, maybe, but
not the right person to approach that.
I think the right person to approach that play would have come in and said, "We got a problem. We can't do this. We're going to put in another show. John, take this and go home and do it later."
I think the play could have been better if the director had been more dramaturgically
maybe
efficient.
But she would have had to rewrite it herself. Okay, you're ruining my story. I've told this story to hundreds and hundreds of students.
I'm so sorry.
You're taking the blame off of me. I want the blame. I want the blame for this. It was a sort of radical leftist take on the myth of Midas, and Susie played the daughter, the princess, who had allied herself with the chorus of Phrygian peasants. It was actually not a bad idea. But, and I'd written this page-long speech about, kind of like, once more into the breach, dear friends, workers of the world unite, and I came in and discovered that somebody, either you or Jackie or all of you, had replaced my huge speech with another speech, which I will recite now, and that speech was, "Let's go." And I was infuriated, and then I thought, actually, "Let's go" is much, much better than that whole thing that I wrote. So,
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah. Oh, there were a few of those, and they improved the play, but it was a mess, and we got terrible reviews, and we got small houses. I remember sitting next door here.
The lights went out?
Was that Midas?
Yeah.
Yes, I was.
We finished the play by flashlight.
That was like the best performance. That was the best performance because it distracted everybody from the script, and everybody was on board. The audience loved it.
Interesting to see that.
Yeah. You grabbed some flashlights.
It was a power failure because it was a storm.
That's right.
And they came out and everything stopped, and the house people brought out, I think it was 3 flashlights.
Yeah.
And we had one in the audience, and the audience, they gave them the audience.
They were totally on board.
And the audience, what was so cool about it was the flashlights focused exactly on who they were supposed to. Like the 3 people.
We should have done it that way every night.
And
that
it was amazing. It was like in a 3-camera setup.
Yeah.
From the director where they would go camera 3. It just went bang,
I remember it was very cool.
Bang, and they followed the whole play.
Right. Right. That was the best performance.
I loved that.
I actually remember when the show was over, I drove my car around and parked it in the parking lot and turned on the high beams and shone them in the dressing room windows for you guys, so you could get changed. But anyway,
that was a big night. Yeah.
There was one day when I was sitting in the manse. This building, the Cult, used to be a church, and the building next door was the manse, and it was actually the offices and studios of Tamahnous at the time. And I was sitting in there in the big dining room with you and Larry Lillo. And Larry Lillo was the artistic director of the company and was kind of a genius. And Stevie's a genius too, but a different kind of genius. Anyway, yeah. And I was reading something by Charles Ludlam, the great American comic playwright, director, and actor. And I said, "So what does this play have that Midas doesn't have?" Which was a very stupid and arrogant thing of me to say. And Larry laughed and proceeded to tell me for about half an hour. It seemed like half an hour. It was probably 5 minutes. You were sitting there reading your paper. You didn't even look up. And I was hoping you'd jump in and support me, but you didn't. So that was a moment. The other moment, the moment that I have been telling my students for 30 years, was a performance of Midas. I'm sitting in the audience. I'm watching these lovely people struggle their way through my dreadful play. There are more people on stage than there are in the house. And I'm thinking, okay, fuck this. I don't know how to write play. I quit. I don't know how to write plays. And then I thought, well, I don't know how to write a play, but I do know how not to write a play. How not to write a play is by doing what I just did to create this thing. So maybe how to write a play is by doing everything I didn't do to create this thing. So what did I not do here? What did I miss?
Right.
And I thought, well, I've heard about plot outlines. They're supposed to be cool.
Yes.
I didn't want to do plot outlines because when you write dialogue, it looks like a script and you can show it to women and impress them, you know. And it flows and and it looks theatrical. And but you write notes for a plot outline, just looks like fucking homework.
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought maybe I should try that. And then I thought, but plot outlines are boring, which they aren't. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was going to be boring. So do I have to finish my vegetables before I can have dessert? Do I have to like finish the plot outline before I can start writing dialogue? That sounds dull. So I thought, no, I'll make a deal with myself. I'll flip the notebook. I'm writing my plot outline. If I get bored, I'll take a scene out of the plot line, turn the notebook over, and start scribbling dialogue from that scene. And it doesn't have to go into the play, and I don't have to feel bad if I throw it out.
Sure.
And that was the beginning of the methodology that I still use and have taught up to very recently.
Yeah.
And the story I just told you, I've told a couple of hundred times, and is an introduction to my students about how to do it. And I am now writing as a retirement project, my book on playwriting, and right now I'm calling it Both Sides of the Story. And it's about using both sides of the brain, one to construct plot from the outside, moving stuff around, and this causes this, and I can move this here, 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 and then jumping inside the characters' heads and improvising, trying to forget that it's in a play, and what does the character really want, and why are they saying this to them, and what are they saying?
Yeah, it sounds
And
great.
that
It
is
sounds
the
spot
basis
on,
for
yes.
everything. You know, I talk to Americans, and you know, Tennessee Williams studied with Piscator, and you know, Arthur Miller studied with so and so, and Mamet studied with Sanford Meisner. I was in LA at a university there giving a talk a couple of years ago, and I said, we don't have that. You know, we're the beginners. Our generation are the beginners in Canada.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
the other thing that was happening, though, and this is also thanks to Pierre Trudeau, was the script development organizations, like the new Play Center, which is now the Playwrights Theatre Center and is still going strong here in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And that became my second home. Pam Hawthorne, the first person I met in Vancouver, the person who auditioned me for that children's tour, was running it. And I remember coming in as an actor and doing workshops. Sharon Pollock's Walsh, I was in that.
That was great to do that.
That was a
We used to do those all the time.
that was a fire hose of an education.
Oh, yeah.
That was like, oh, that's how you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And you-
I remember, you know, I was a bit of a Tamahnous groupie, and I would come in and watch rehearsals because you guys were really interesting to watch. Tamahnous was an extraordinary
It was
company.
It
was a very cool
It
company.
really was. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And but one of the things that struck me was because you were such a collective that you would all give each other notes, which is supposed to be against the rules, but you seem to have evolved a way of doing it where nobody got hurt and everything was sort of rational and coherent and it all made sense. So I thought that was very cool.
Yeah.
I don't know how you did it, and I
think
don't
the
care,
more
but
you do it, the less hurt there is.
yeah,
Yeah.
because it's not about who's right; it's about what works.
And I think a
Yeah.
lot of it started at UBC because so many of us were at UBC,
Yeah,
and
it could be.
UBC in the theater department was the opposite of what Tamahnous was.
I'd seen a tiny little item in the Vancouver Province newspaper about two 14-year-old boys in Ipswich, England, who had tried to fight a duel to the death. They had made their own swords. They both had a crush on the same girl, and they wanted to prove that chivalry was not dead. I love that. And one of them wound up hospitalized with abdominal wounds. They tried to kill each other. They went for it. And at first I went down to the library. This was before the internet. I went down to the library and tried to find the British papers with the full story, and I couldn't find it. And then I thought, fuck it, this is all I need. And I took my new approach and started writing a plot outline about a play about 2 teenage boys who are into fencing and decide to fight a duel to the death. And that was Dreaming and Dueling. And it was not just the new approach, it was also Joa, my wife. And she was enormously helpful. But it was also a way of kind of checking this new process that I had and working really well on that. Partway through the job at CHQM, I quit to go and work for Co-op Radio, which was new.
Yes.
Vancouver Co-op Radio, which was this leftist hippy-dippy radio station.
Co-op radio station.
Yeah.
Still going.
Yeah. There's a great story that when the committee that was founding the station went before the CRTC to apply for the license, there's this big room full of people, and there's a bunch of other people applying for licenses for commercial radio stations. They're all guys in suits, right?
Yeah.
And we were there, a bunch of hippies. And Naomi, my daughter, was a toddler. And Joa was there with Naomi on her lap, and Naomi got away and ran down the aisle. I believe Video In has some footage of this. Naomi ran down the aisle in her diaper with a bottle in her hand towards all these people sitting up here on this dais. And Joa ran after her and picked her up to, sorry, went back up the aisle. And later, one of the guys from CRTC said to Leora, whose last name I forget, who was one of the founders, he said, that was when we knew you guys were for real. And that you weren't trying to do a commercial station, and get away with it. Anyway, so Co-op Radio was a lot of fun. And I left CHQM to work for them. You can't... the rules about Co-op Radio was you couldn't pay people to work there, but they created a legal fiction which was called Western S, which was a broadcasting school, which was all legally legit and could funnel money through that to pay people to teach and to do some productions. So I did that for a while, and it wasn't, I don't know if it wasn't paying enough or if anyway, I went crawling back to CHQM and they took me back, and I stayed on for a while, and then finally they fired me because I was wasting their time. One of the reasons they fired me was that I was taking time off from work to go and be in a movie. Skip Tracer. Starring Stephen E. Miller with David Peterson and John Lazarus. Starring David Peterson. Starring our dear deceased friend, David Peterson.
For those who don't know, great, pretty kind of a groundbreaking Canadian film.
One critic said it's Jaws from the point of view of the shark. It was about these repo guys who work for this shady loan company and keep repossessing stuff. It's the hero's sidekick.
Cool
Yeah.
It's a really cool movie.
Yeah.
And
I've got stories about that.
And it's kind of a Canadian classic. It gets redone at Cinematech. They do screenings every
The Kingston Film Festival was going to do it, and then COVID showed up, so I'm still hoping they'll do it and they'll interview me. I did appear on stage in Ottawa when they showed it at some festival a few years ago, and it was fun to do.
Actually, the hardest thing for me, the most instructive thing for me was being the boom sound guy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very hard job. You get to watch everything.
Yeah.
And
No, I'd forgotten that until you told me.
Rick Patton, who's now gone, was my mixer and taught me everything, and it was a great experience.
Because at CHQM, in addition to writing the commercials, I became their theater guy, and Morris Foisey, who was my boss, came to me and said, "Can you tell us something about this, or write me some copy about that?" Or if a theater person came in to town, I would get to interview them, So I already kind of had a sense that I could do this. I could write theater criticism. And then I heard that James Barber, who was the theater critic for the Vancouver province, and quite a good one, and also a food writer and television personality, was quitting the province. And I saw him at a party or an opening or something, and I went up, I hear you're leaving. And he said, yeah. I said, how do I get your job? And he said, I don't know. How do you get my job? And I kind of did the same thing that I did with Jürgen. Not necessary. I kind of did the same thing I did with Jürgen. I said, the next time you get a show, I'll go with you. I'll be your date.
Yeah.
And we go back to the newsroom, and you write your review, which they publish, and I write a review. And I said, I'll give it to you. And if you think it's worth showing to the other guys, you do. And if you don't think it's worth showing to the other guys, we'll still be friends.
Yeah, that's
And he said, all right.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
strategy.
So we went, and the show was not a play. It was a poetry reading by Allen Ginsberg, which was a hoot. And it was really fun to write about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At UBC?
I don't remember where it
I
was.
saw him at UBC.
I do remember that there was this Japanese photographer there taking a lot of pictures of Allen. And his name was Tacky Blues Singer.
Tacky?
And he was like the coolest guy in town. And he was married to Lynn Bennett, who I thought was really cute.
Yeah.
I'd seen her on stage in a few shows, and I really liked her. And I don't know if she was there or not. I don't think so. Tacky gave me one of his photographs of Allen Ginsberg after I'd married Lynn, after I'd married his ex-wife. Yeah. He was...
Yeah.
He had a lot of good qualities, did Tacky.
Yeah.
Anyway. So I reviewed Allen Ginsberg's poetry reading, and I got the job at the province. And then I worked variously at, I was doing reviews at Co-op Radio, even after I no longer officially worked for them, I think. And, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. CKVU television. That was interesting. That was my one foray into television.
Yeah.
And I would usually go live.
Yeah.
And there was one night when I was live, and I was reading the teleprompter, and the teleprompter went down, and I had to finish live off the top of my head, so that was fun. And they kept writing little compliments on my check stubs. Great work, keep up the good work, and then they fired me. I never knew why. I don't know why. Anyway, but the main one was CBC Radio, and I was there for a long time. I became their sort of national guy for Vancouver Theatre, their critic. And at the same time I was writing Dreaming and Dueling, which opened at the Waterfront Theatre.
Yes.
And it was produced by the New Play Centre, which didn't have quite enough money to do it. So the Vancouver Playhouse kicked in some money.
Yeah.
So it became a New Play Centre Vancouver Playhouse co-pro. And at the same time, the Vancouver Playhouse was busy doing one of Tennessee Williams' last plays.
That's right. Red Devil Battery.
The Red Devil Battery Sign.
Yeah.
And I was so buried in Dreaming and Dueling that I didn't even know Tennessee Williams was in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Opening night, I'm sitting there with my girlfriend, and Roger Hodgman, who was the artistic director of the Playhouse, comes in, and he's not with his wife. He's with this funny little guy who looks like sort of elderly hippie in a leather jacket and a big grin on his face. And I realize it's Tennessee Williams has come to see my play. And the way I realized it was Tennessee Williams was my girlfriend says, "John, you're hurting my arm." That's how I knew it. And he came up to me afterwards, or I was summoned. This is the Waterfront. It's a warm night, and Roger comes into the lobby and says, "Tennessee would like a word with you." So I go out and I'm enveloped in this bear hug, and he smells of bourbon.
Yes.
And I memorized this. "I enjoyed your play very much. It had a lovely, pristine quality. It had a beautiful rise and fall." That's what he said.
Wow.
And he wanted to get together and talk about playwriting. And the next day was this big press conference.
Right.
And again, Canadian playwriting was the big motherhood, blah, blah. And so they kept asking him about Canadian playwriting. The only Canadian play he'd seen was Dreaming and Dueling. So he kept saying nice things about it. And tickets went through the roof. But I had to review Red Devil Battery Sign for CBC Radio.
Okay.
So I decided not to have lunch with him and discuss playwriting.
Yeah.
And I kind of tiptoed around it because it wasn't a good play. It wasn't very good.
That's a
Now
tough
there's-
situation.
Yeah,
That is a tough situation.
And I ran into him again, and I don't know if he knew that I was the kindest of the critics.
Yeah.
But I ran into him again, and I said, "Well, could we do that lunch?" And he said, I leave. I go home tomorrow. And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry." He says, "Well, if you didn't call, you didn't call." And he turned his back on me. I don't know if he knew. But there's a footnote to this, which is that many years later, the great Daniel McIver, Toronto playwright, director, and actor, wrote a play about Tennessee Williams in Vancouver called His Greatness. And the play ends with them listening to CBC radio, listening to the female critic on CBC radio savaging his play. Now, it doesn't say Tennessee Williams. I think he's called Sir or something.
Right.
The other two characters are his manager. I think they did here with Alan Gray and David Marr, and a young male hooker that the manager finds for him.
Okay.
And those are the three characters. And it ends with him listening to this review and knowing that his career is over. And somehow I wound up talking with David Marr, and he said, we decided to find out what the real CBC radio critic had said. And we found it, online, and holy shit, it's Lazarus. and MacIver said, you were a lot kinder than I was, because MacIver had read the play and had written the review that he thought it deserved. Anyway. My friend Catherine Shaw, who ran Studio 58, which was still is, theater conservatory program that I admired enormously, came to me and said, you want to come in and do a little workshop on playwriting with our students? And I said, sure. And I don't think I realized that she was trying me out. So I went in and I did that, and that was fun. And she hired me to teach playwriting and to take over a program they already had of solo shows, one-person shows. And I did that for 10 years.
Wow.
I never had to mark them. I never had to give them grades. I would say to them, look, here's the deal. Studio 58 wants to turn out people who know what everybody's doing, have a sense of how everybody's job is done. I want a first draft of a one-act play. I said, I don't care. I don't have to grade you. I don't care about quality. It doesn't have to be any good. I said, frankly, just between us, you don't even have to finish it, but I want you to finish it because I want you to have the experience of finishing a draft. Just, get it in and you'll learn something from that. And then they would all kind of laugh and relax. And out of that came some really good plays too. Lynn and I got married in 1999. And one day I'm on the computer and I see an email through the Playwrights Guild of Canada, which is the national organization of playwrights. University is looking for a playwriting instructor, and I'm used to seeing these. And they always say the candidate must have a PhD or a master's degree, and I would go, yeah, okay, fine, yeah. And this one doesn't mention a PhD or a master's degree. It says we're looking for an experienced playwright with teaching experience. And I'm going, I don't have a degree. This job is perfect, but heap of teaching experience. And Lynn comes home from the arts club where she's working, and she says, have you seen this? And she shows it to me on paper. It got faxed to the arts club. Same posting. And I'm thinking, okay, they're approaching playwrights and they're sending it to theaters. So they're not looking for an academic. I still didn't think I'd get it. But I wanted to see the university where my father had been a student, a free trip to Kingston. So I went. And I've been living there ever since. And I taught mostly playwriting. Taught a lot about TYA. And that was fun because I took to Skyping practitioners in the field. People from Green Thumb, people from Young People's Theatre in Toronto, where I wrote, I guess, my most popular play, Village of Idiots, for Young People's Theatre in Toronto. And, just various other people from around the country and elsewhere. And we'd Skype them and put them up on the big screen in the lecture hall, and the students would come up and sit in front of the camera and ask them questions. So that was a fun course. Oh, and also part of the TYA course was I'd divide the students into small groups, and each group would create a little 10-minute play for children. And the last day of the term, we would troop out to a local elementary school and go into the gyms and put on the plays for real life children. So that was terrifying. Yeah, and other courses. And that... A couple of years ago, I wrote 2 in a row that were sort of elaborate and comparatively serious political, social issues, Anyway,
Yeah.
2 plays in a row, nobody wanted. Nobody's picked them up.
Yeah.
So the summer of 2019, I decided I'm going to knock off playwriting. For the first time since I was in my 20s, there's never been a day when I have not had a play in the back of my head to be thought about. And by January of 2020, when COVID began, I realized one thing I knew, which was that not writing a play was very, very uncomfortable to me.
Yeah.
And so I decided if everybody else is treating this as an old man's hobby, fuck it, so will I. And I discovered a wonderful fact about Oscar Wilde, which was that when he was 27 in 1882, he did his famous lecture tour of North America. And, he was bisexual. He loved women. He loved men. He loved booze. The only town where he had so much fun and got so distracted that he actually missed the train to the next town was Kingston, Ontario, which to people who live in Kingston is very funny because Kingston is very straight and sober and stuffy and da-da-da-da-da. I thought, screw it. I'm just doing this for myself.
Yeah, do it.
So I stole one plot from The Importance of Being Earnest and another plot from Lady Windermere's Fan and cobbled them together and started having fun. And I decided if it's not fun, I stop and I look at why it's not fun and I make it fun again and I keep going. And it's now, I think, one of the best things I've ever written.
Cool.
My agent is very excited about it.
Excellent.
People who've read it are over the moon about it. Yeah, it'd be nice.
Wouldn't that be great?
It would be great, yeah.
Naomi posted something on Facebook I saw the other day about there are no famous playwrights.
Yeah.
That was very funny.
It's a good story.
It was really quite funny about how, let's see, what was it? She was at a cafe or something? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are no famous Canadian playwrights.
And so she turns to the
Total stranger.
neighboring table for verification. She says,
Name
do
a
you know any famous Canadian playwrights? And they go, yeah, John Lazarus.
And it turned out that she had lived with us when she was 2.
Right. I love it.
Little Lorian Roebuck.
Naomi.
Yeah. Which proves, of course, I'm not famous. She just happened to live with us. When I was in my late teens or early 20s, I decided on a career goal. I thought I should have a goal. And my goal was to make a contribution to Canadian theatre or film or television. And that was like a smart choice. I made some really stupid choices back then, but that was a smart choice because that kind of left it open. And I feel like I've been doing that, and so that when my plays productions started to slow down, I could go, well, I'm teaching new generations of, I am meeting the students of my former students now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a treat.
That's kind of neat.
Yeah.